Janet, what are you touching? Why'd you make us... Janet. All right. Anyway, we're live now. I don't know how that happened, but we're live. Janet, mute yourself. I'm hearing the echo. I would definitely edit this out.
Yes, what?
Mute yourself. I'm hearing the echo.
Sorry.
All right, now we're good. Okay, so guys, this is going to be a challenge because what I'm reacting to, I have no expertise in. So, you know, I was asked to react this. I was blessed, you could say by monetary blessing, to take on this challenge. And I said I'd do it after seminary class, and that I would do it after my most recent debate. And so here I am. So with that said, I'll share my screen, and I'm going to show you how to study something that you don't know anything about. All right. So with that said, I'm going to pull up a document. Let me stop sharing my screen just for a minute. I'm going to pull up a document first. This stuff is like foreign to me, and so I'm going to have to use all kinds of tricks to understand it. So this article is called Family Trees Tracing the World's Ancestors. Okay. And we'll see if this works. And I think the audio is the same as the written. 5-minute listen. Yeah. Okay. So let's go ahead and put this in a document. All right. Believe it or not, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the end of the article. Okay. And I'm going to be like, all right, well, what's the point? We're going to work our way backwards because I'm trying to think about the connection of things. So I'm going to read this article backwards. And we'll see how this goes. I'll blow it up so we can see it. I'm getting this weird formatting issue on my computer. All right. So a few thousand years after that. Well, after what? The 80% of us, those who leave children, who in turn leave children, and so on, will be ancestors of all humanity. What an inheritance. So, okay, so this is going to be about how one would be ancestors of all humanity, which makes sense because look at the question by Dr. Yang Wan, evolutionary biologist. A question on radio listener asked about the bloodline between Jesus and King David raised a wider genealogical issue. How many generations does it take before someone alive today is a descendant of everyone on the planet? So there's the question. And a few thousand years after that, 80% of us, those who leave children, who in turn leave children, and so on, will be ancestors of all humanity. What an inheritance. So there's the answer. Now, how did he come to the answer? Let's go to the previous statement. And so we got to connecting to the previous idea. So this is probably not going to solve everything. And one can, of course, project this model into the future. What model? We got to see what model's being talked about. 2, the math tells us that in 3,000 years, someone that's alive today will be a common ancestor of all humanity. Well, that answers the question too. So tells us that someone alive today. So someone. So the difference is in the amount of people. Looks like someone versus 80% of us. That seems to be the distinction there. Okay. Let's back it up a little bit. So it's asking the question, how far do we have to go back to find the most recent common ancestors of all humans today? So here's the question. Again, estimates are remarkably short. So he's answering it for us. We don't have to go that far back, according to this. Even taking account of distant isolation and local inbreeding, the quote figures are 100% or so generations in the past, of merely 3,000 years. Okay. So the point is that the world is, let's just say it's 6,000 years old, right? Maybe 10,000. We'll just go with 6,000 for working purposes. All you got to go back is 100 generations 3,000 years ago, according to this. So that would take us to 1,000 BC. Something like that. Let's see where he goes with all that. What about the wider ramifications? Well, wider ramifications of what? We'll see in a minute. It says a single immigrant who breeds into a population has roughly 80% chance of becoming a common ancestor. So it's saying that there's an 80% chance that if you're an immigrant, meaning you're not originally from that country, then there's a good chance of you becoming a common ancestor eventually, based on the 80% chance. A single interbreeding event in the distant past will probably, therefore, graft the immigrant's family tree onto that of the native population. So, in other words, if there was one moment of interbreeding, this would result in the family, like it says, in the mixing of the line, onto that native population. That makes it very likely that. So it uses the language of graft, okay, which I think is this person wanted me to read in light of Romans 11. That makes it very likely that King David is the direct ancestor of the population of many other countries too. Okay. So there's the furthermore answer that's mentioned before. Okay, so what about the wider ramifications? Then it says reductions of population caused by events such as Assyrian invasions. In other words, when people died, will have produced more inbred family trees and shortened the number of generations needed to reach a common ancestry. That's why I'm going backwards. That's why everyone alive in the Holy Land at the time of Jesus would have been able to claim David for their ancestor. But that didn't mean they could claim to be the Messiah, though. Apply that to the case of King David. Well, apply what? Well, what we're talking about. According to this model, what model? We still got to talk about the model. He would be a common ancestor of the whole population of the Holy Land somewhere between 20 and 35 generations after his life. Okay? That's even without Solomon sowing his seed so widely. All right, so now we got an image idea, caption. We don't need that. We don't need image source, image caption. Advances in DNA. So this is about DNA, according to him. Allow us to detect shared genetic ancestry. In fact, about 80% of the people at the time in the past. So here's this number 80% again. I don't know if it's the same as the previous 80%. In fact, about 80% of the people at the time in the past will be the ancestors of everyone in the present. Okay. That seems to be a restatement of what's going on. The remaining 20% are those who have no children, of whose children have no children, and so on. In other words, people who were genetic dead ends. Okay. So if I split my screen, look at the comparison here between these two ideas. A few thousand years after that, after what? That someone will project this model to the future to match us that in 3,000 years, someone Elijah will be a common ancestor of all humanity. A few thousand years later, 80% of us will be ancestors of all humanity. Okay? And I'm wondering if this 80% up here is going in here. And okay, yeah, it is. Because look, he's arguing for the advances in DNA. So this is probably related to the model. Applying that to King David's situation, and here's the results. Okay. All right. All right. If you go back on average, so we're still talking about tracing something back. 1.77 times further. Again, 35 generate. Everyone in the population have exactly the same set of common ancestors, although they will be related, of course, or different routes in the different family trees. If people in this population meet and breed at random, it turns out that you only need to go back an average 20 generations before you find an individual who is a common ancestor of everyone in the population. This article keeps repeating itself. Okay, I'm seeing that phrase, before you become the common ancestor of everyone in the population. Okay, more specifically, imagine Shipless Cade's population of constant size, say 1 million, approximate size of the Holy Land at the time of Jesus. Constant size, population. Okay. Even so, by that time, you will have collected a large number of people in your ancestry. So you're collecting a large number. So it's not surprising any two people in any one country probably won't need to go back many generations before finding a common ancestor. But as your family tree increases thousands upon thousands, you will inevitably find many obscure branches that have interbred. That's when the numbers start tailing off. Okay. You are unlikely to be the product of inbreeding between recent ancestors. So initially, your increasing ancestors will indeed be exponential. In short, we seem to have too many ancestors. Okay. So now I got an idea where he's going. So let's start from the beginning. How many generations does it take before someone alive today is descended to everyone on the planet? Listeners to the More or Less program Radium 4 have been challenging me to answer any fiendish question they could throw at me. All right, so let's just eliminate the information as we go. A question about Jesus' genealogy was rather interesting, and the answer has astounding ramifications. This is just my psychological way of saying I'm reading it and understanding it and going along the way. The Bible says Jesus was the descendant of King David, but with 1,000 years between them, and since King David's son Solomon was said to have about 1,000 wives and mistresses, couldn't many of Jesus' peers in the Holy Land claim the same royal ancestor? So this guy who sent this to me is a Christian, but this argument could be against Jesus' claim to be the Messiah. What makes Jesus the right Messiah? We believe Jesus is the right Messiah, but what makes him believe that when others could have claimed it according to this argument? Theory tells us that not only would all of Jesus' contemporaries be descended from King David, but that this would probably be the case even if a Solomon had been into monogamy. In other words, what he was saying earlier is you don't even have to count Solomon and all the times that he slept with other women. You can count this number from King David alone. Okay? We can make this sort of prediction because over the last 15 years or so, these ideas have been studied as part of the research into understanding patterns in our own genome. The most successful approach has been to go backwards in time, taking a sample of people and imagining the pattern of inheritance in their ancestral family tree. When applied to and when it's talking about inheritance, it's talking about genetic inheritance. When applied to the question of who is descended from whom, the results can surprise even the professionals. That's because geneticists normally study biological information, DNA, that people inherit from just one of their parents. Okay? Just like a surname or the male lines of descent quoted in the Bible, these generate lineages that shrink or expand rather slowly. That's why we expect the proportion of Smiths in the phone book to fluctuate only a little from decade to decade. The surprise comes if we look at an inheritance from both parents. Here the numbers change drastically as the generations go by. For instance, we have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 grandparents, and so on. Each generation back, we multiply the number by 2. This leads to what is called an exponential increase: 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 60, 128, 256, 512, 1024, and so on. It is not long before we hit huge numbers. Take the specific case of Jesus and King David. The number of generations between them is at least 35. Luke lists 42 generations down the male line, and Matthew gives an incomplete list of 27. Okay, we don't need the picture. Jesus would have had more than 34 billion potential ancestors. All right, so in other words, there should be 34 billion people alive. Essentially what he's saying. Or at least live from that point. These numbers agree reasonably well with the average time between generations of 25 to 30 years. An estimate taken from documented historical record from Iceland and Canada. So how long are the generations? So back in that time, Jesus would have had at least 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. In other words, 35 times. In other words, 2 to the 35th power, or more than 34 billion potential ancestors. That's far more than the total population of the world, of course. This is a good illustration of what's been called the genealogical paradox. In short, we seem to have too many ancestors. The solution is that we have to take inbreeding into account. Many of these ancestors were duplicates. The same person can be found through multiple routes in the family tree. Okay, that makes sense. You're unlikely to be the product of inbreeding recent ancestors, so initially your increase in ancestors will indeed be almost exponential, but then it tapers off. But as your family tree increases to thousands upon thousands, you will inevitably find many obscure branches that have interbred. That's when the number starts tailing off. Even so, by that time, you have collected a large number of people in your ancestry. So it's not surprising that any two people in any one country probably won't need to go back many generations before finding a common ancestor. More specifically, imagine the simplest case of population. And so this is where he's arguing, look, if we say it's 1 million people, if we go back 20 generations, and this is an average of this many generations, and then basically what we find out is that 80% of the people will be the ancestors of everyone in the present. Then he applies this to David, okay? And then mentioning Solomon again, saying you don't need Solomon for that. And then everyone that was alive during the Holy Land of Jesus' time could claim to be David as an ancestor. And then it mentions reductions of population, like for wars, invasions, increase of inbreeding, which limits the number of ancestries, or at least it mentions the duplicates. And so what about the wider ramifications? A single immigrant. So in other words, say a Gentile that joins to the theocracy of Israel, right? They can become an ancestor of Israel. But see, this is the real issue is this. The real issue is that we're talking about a theocracy. And when you're talking about a theocracy, you're talking about a government, okay? And when you're talking about a government, you're talking about citizenship, basically. And so the thing is that underneath the theocracy of Israel, you could be an ethnic Israelite, or what's the term they use? An immigrant. There's other words, but you could be an ethnic Israelite, whatever that means, even though it's a relative term, according to this argument. You could be an ethnic Israelite or immigrant and have citizenship in the theocracy of Israel. So, by that standard, these Gentiles become I'm going to say Israelis. Some people don't like that term. Okay. Hey, Cole. So what this guy is trying to do, he's an amillennialist. And so I don't believe in the covenant promises and other things like that. He's free grace at least, so that's good. But essentially what he's trying to do is he's trying to say arguments like Romans 11 and other passages like that don't work because it talks about the grafted in. And if an immigrant is grafted in, then basically what he's trying to say is that it does away with ethnic distinctions. And even if people are related genetically, through ancestry, it doesn't mean they're related governmentally. And what's significant about that is when we're talking about the nations or the Gentiles, a lot of times the word ethnos and goyim refers to the nations. And nations could be composed of people that are made of various ethnicities. And so I think what's going on is it's nation versus nation. So God gives a promise to a nation. That's a theocracy. And then the other nations, which we typically call Gentiles, is what's in play. In the kingdom, what's going to happen is that the theocracy of Israel is going to be in charge, and the nations are going to be held accountable to Christ during that time. In the church age, you don't have a theocracy. There's no theocracy. And there's no nations in that sense. What we have is people that are able to trace their ancestry, or they say they can trace their ancestry to being ethnic Jews, for whatever that is. And you got people that say, no, I'm more of a Gentile or whatever. But regardless of that, you're not talking about nations. That's the issue. The church is not a nation. And so these distinctions in Romans 11 deal with nations. They're not dealing with the church. And so that would be my initial answer to that. I'm going to look at the comments and see what's going on. NFB, I took it on. I'm glad you're in the comments. I attempted. I don't know a lot about this article type stuff. I'm open to it, but yeah. And Cole, good to see you. Janet, is there anything you want to say? No, I guess Janet the ones. I am a descendant of Jacob. You are a descendant of Jacob. Okay. You're physical Israel, but you're not theocratic Israel. That's the point. If you claim you're physical Israel or physical Gentile, it doesn't matter. You're not the theocracy of Israel. That's the big issue. All right, well, this was a nice experiment. I'm gonna go ahead and land this plane, especially since my wife is preoccupied. So before 1947, no one was Israel. Hold on. What makes you think I'm going to a 1947 and 1948 date? That's when the world governments recognized the nation of Israel. And I know there's other things that were before that and everything. But I'm not talking, I don't believe that's a theocracy either. So there were people that had ties to their ethnicity didn't change. It may have got watered down, it may have got nuanced or whatever, but there wasn't a theocratic Israel ever since Acts 2. They'll be saved in the future. Hello, Nicholas. I took on a challenge I don't know too much about. But I'm fixing to land the plane, I think. So, NIFB, if you want me to work on some other stuff for you, just let me know. I did what I could at this point. God bless.